Hello, I am Marilyn, and I am an alcoholic.
Hi, Marilyn.
My sobriety date is February 8th, 1972. And my home group is the Pacific Group in Los Angeles. I have a sponsor, and I sponsor people. That's a big topic this weekend. And I'm just thrilled to be here. I know many of you from many years in Alcoholics Anonymous, like Kelly. We were both crazy jaybergs when we met, so that was lovely. Thank you, Jerry, wherever you went. There he is. Thank you for the invitation and everybody who worked on this wonderful weekend. And I'm so grateful to all the speakers. They're friends of mine. I've known them for many, many years, too. And last night we heard Billy, and he's kind of the watchdog of Alcoholics Anonymous. Goodness, he really guards us and reminds us of the basics, and what got us sober is going to keep us sober, and it's our obligation to pass that on as pure as possible as we can and stay active. And I appreciate that. And the lovely Mari, I've known for years now, and that gentle wisdom always teaches me something. And I loved hearing the sponsorship exchange between Marnie and Debbie. We're all in the same sponsorship family. And I'll tell you, I always learn something from them. But more than that, I try to stay active, because it would be embarrassing not to with people like that in my life. Goodness. And that gets to Bob, whom we'll hear later. And he's going to talk tonight. I always learn something new when Bob talks. He has millions of different things to talk about alcoholism, because he has lived a very full life. And yet the thing that I think I'm most impressed with and learn the most from is the example that he sets of just complete dedication to Alcoholics Anonymous. Will pack up and go anywhere in the world to carry this message to the alcoholic who still suffers. I'm going to talk about steps 6 and 7, which have always fascinated me because they're a little bit mystical. And one of the things that I've always have to guard against is that line in the book: we can keep our head in the clouds, but we got to keep our feet planted on the ground. And I'm like a hot air balloon. I want to sail into outer space with ideas and mysticism. So of course I'm attracted to 6 and 7. But on the other hand, our book teaches us how to observe 6 and 7 and keep our feet on the ground. And 6 tells us that it says we were past. We were entirely willing to have these defects removed. And 7 says, humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. And Chuck C. a long time ago said that he actually asked Bill Wilson, what's the difference? And Bill said, well, none, but it would make it more interesting if I used 2 different words. Now that's the story I heard, but other people have told me another story, that there is a difference, and defects are commissions of grave errors and sins and so forth. And shortcomings are those omissions, like I should have gone to the bedside when my mother was dying, but I didn't, and I can't forgive myself. But they both describe character defects, of course. And these steps 6 and 7 that deal with them are halfway between step 1 and step 12. They just come right in the middle. And it was a real breaking point, or a real bend in my sobriety, 6 and 7, because it involved as massive a surrender as my surrender to powerlessness over alcohol. I had to surrender to my powerlessness over my character defects. So it was another commitment. But you see, one of my character defects was complete self-obsession, me-centered living, self-centered response to everything in the universe. What about me? And I just didn't have room for God. It helped that I studied science. I wanted to be a scientist and studied science for a long time. And that allowed me to have God as a science. I mean, that's reason. So I came into the program without any idea about the spiritual part of the program. But steps 6 and 7 were that boost along the way, the transfer from me-centeredness to first other-centeredness, and then finally God, a God-centered life, where the focus was on God, focus on higher power. And why would we even want to do that? Well, for a long time I thought character defects were my friends. They allowed me some kind of almost instant gratification on many occasions. For example, lying was just wonderful. Because I lived in fantasy and I wanted to be something else, somewhere else. It was always happening there. And if I lied, I can sort of put myself there. And yet, as with many of the character defects, there was a tab to pay later. I was just thinking about my past. Mari, in talking about the inventory, talked to me. There was one that I just thought I would never tell anybody, but I'm going to tell you about it. I did write it in an inventory, and that's what set me free from obsessing about it. But I was working in a lab. I was a graduate student, and I had a wonderful advisor, and he worked on vision. So I was working on vision with him, and there are creatures called flatworms, and they're darling. They have what looks like two big eyes, and they're cross-eyed, but they are sensitive to light. And so I was just in love with these little worms, these creatures, and thought I'd do a project. And since they're sensitive to light with these eye-like things on their little heads, I thought I would measure the sensitivity. It's called the spectral sensitivity, and you just flash different wavelengths, and then you can plot how responsive. If they crawl away, they don't like light, they like to stay in the dark. Then you can get a map of how they respond to the different wavelengths. Well, that was exciting to me, so I told my advisor that I would do that. Well, it was much harder. My flatworms died. They did not respond to any light. Some of them all came out at once. So it was just one of those things. So I thought, I've got to have some results. So I went to the biomedical library and looked up a paper, and somebody actually had measured the spectral sensitivity of these flatworms. So I copied down notes and drew that in my lab book, drew the wonderful chart. This is exactly the spectral sensitivity. And my advisor said, that's amazing. I mean, I don't know how you did that so fast. And I said, well, you know, I worked overtime. Dedication. And my chest was puffing up with pride of this wonderful experiment that I've done. And then he said, so let's send it off to science, just a note to science. Yikes. So, thank God I did not pursue that, because that would have been one of those hideous things that show up in the newspapers about plagiarism. So I said, oh, it's nothing, you know, it's not. But he knew, he didn't say, but he knew. And his reaction to me got cold after that. And eventually I found another advisor. So there was a tab to pay for lying and other character defects too, and I had many of them. I think that one of them was just sick dependency on anybody that looked good to me. I would just attach myself. I want to follow you anywhere. Live my life for me. And I certainly did that with my long-suffering husband that I met. And he was older. He was already a scientist when I was just starting. So he was the obvious choice, and I attached to him. For some reason, he was attracted to me in all of my craziness and childlike behavior. And we were married. But then I began to work out on him mercilessly, because dependence meant I could never get enough from you to satisfy me, to make me a happy person. So it was, you don't love me, do you? Yes, I do. Of course I do. Well, you don't show it. Well, what would you like me to do? Well, you could bring home dinner sometime. Okay, I'll bring home dinner. No, because you didn't think of it. And it was just, if you'd move to the left, when I said, just move, but you got to move more that way. No, that's not right. And he had a girlfriend about 5 years before he met me. And I couldn't stand that. And I tortured him. Why did you do that? Didn't you know I was coming? So thank God I've lived a long life. I was able to make lots of amends to him over the years. He passed away 4 years ago, but we were together for almost 61 years. So he really knew how to hang in. So character defects. They're one of the reasons, because of this tab, that alcohol was so attractive to me. Because when I drank, this trouble that I was getting into by just being this completely self-centered person and living in that way, I could drink and then I felt good. But the thing about drinking for me was that then I could engage in character defects, like really malicious gossip, lying about people, betraying people. I could do all of those things without feeling bad about it. I could just drink. Well, as a consequence, I lost my career because I chose drinking instead of working, and that did not go over too well after a year or so. And then I was at home and unable to take care of my family. By the time I got to the program, we had 3 little children, and I couldn't take care of them. And my husband was frantic and brought in grandmas, my mother, his mother, because of the great mad, crazy woman in the attic. And so now, alcohol brought out another character defect, which was fear. I built up a defense against that by moving more or less into the garage. And I felt that kept you away, kept mother-in-law away, kept these people away who talked to me about my drinking. If I stayed there and only went out at night to get more to drink, I wouldn't run into those people from the lab. Fear. And like a cornered animal, if somebody did encroach on my defenses, my space, I would snarl at them and insult them and say things like, "Go away, you rotten old witch," or something that rhymes with it. I'd say to my mother-in-law, "You're poisoning the children's mind against me." That rage out of deep and terrible fear. So that's the point at which I was going to die, or a miracle would happen. The miracle came through central office, in AA central office in Los Angeles. And they sent somebody to get me. And that was an introduction to this program, which just went so against everything that I did not believe in. I believed in the great God, no God, so the spirituality was a mystery. And there's this wonderful quote of Clancy, the founder of the group that I was taken into, the Pacific group. And he talks about we have to accept and take some actions that we don't believe in, and that is the beginning of true sobriety. And I didn't believe in much of that, but I did come to believe in Alcoholics Anonymous. That was important. And I was beginning to take certain actions, namely the steps, involvement in the fellowship, that I really didn't believe would work, but it was working. And our founder, Clancy, at that time was not my sponsor. I had another sponsor, Marion, at that time. But he told a wonderful story that gave me some kind of insight that I did not have, and that was, he talked about an invisible boat. And so he said, come in to the fellowship. Now, here's the lake, and there's a boat. Now get into that boat. There's no boat there. Get into it anyway. All right, so I step into the water, except I don't get wet. Something's firm under my feet. Now sit down. Well, there's no seats. Sit down anyway. All right, I'll sit on the floor of this thing, but there was a seat when I sat down. Okay, now pick up an oar and row. Of course, there's no oars. But then I reach out my hand and I feel something, and I start rowing. And the boat starts moving out. And I look and I can see the boat. It's there. It becomes visible. So I stop rowing in awe. And then gradually the boat starts to disappear. And I hear the voice, start rowing. And then it comes back. So when we keep rowing, when we keep participating, we can see it and we know that the fellowship is here and it's a miracle fellowship. When I start drifting away and feeling bad, that first thought is, well, AA doesn't work for me. The boat disappears. So as long as I kept rowing, I was taking these steps and writing an inventory. And my sponsor was Marilyn at that time, and she pointed out these patterns, this sick dependency that I seemed to form on people, like her. I had attached to her and was trying to drain out her life, but she had a great sense of herself, and she would just say, go talk to some newcomer, go away. And I would do those things because a part of that sick dependency was, please like me and approve of me, please. So I was doing everything, including taking these steps, and she pointed out some of these and pointed out how they had gotten me into trouble, and would I like to have them removed. And I thought, yeah, I believe you, that I probably would be better off if I did not have these things that kept me locked into my own soul, kept me so guilty, kept me feeling bad. Yeah, I think that would probably be okay. And she said, okay, go read about steps 6 and 7. Well, of course, I got my big book out and read, and I was amazed to see that there's only 2 paragraphs. The first one talks about developing a kind of willingness. Well, if you can't develop willingness, it says, then pray to your higher power to become willing. All right, then I went on to step 7, and it was a nice prayer, and I read it, and yet I just thought, I don't know what this means. I mean, I read that prayer. I think I still have character defects. So I went to Marianne and I said, there's just 2 short paragraphs. And she said, that's because God has to do all the work in that one, pretty much. God acting through the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, it's a funny thing. I'm reading a book right now. This sounds like a digression, because it is, but I'll come back. Janine Reed, called The Opposite of Certainty, and it's about a mother whose son, 8-year-old son, developed a brain tumor. And there's a line in that I trust God with everything, except my children. And I think that was kind of my attitude. Well, I have come to believe in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I don't understand what it could do to relieve me of character defects. That's my job. So I thought, okay, if I just substitute the opposite for whatever it is, like telling lies and dishonesty, if I just tell the truth, then even the great Chuck C says we can't think our way into right actions, but we can act our way into right thinking, then it will be done. I will take care of my character defects. I've learned how to do it through Chuck C and this fellowship. Well, that's not what the 7th step prayer says, but I wasn't reading it carefully. So I began to do that, and I would be honest. I would now and then substitute the truth for a lie that I wanted to tell, unless it was inconvenient. Can you go to Bakersfield and substitute for me tomorrow? Well, that's a long drive, maybe 90 miles or something. And I would love to do that, but I've just come down with tuberculosis. And with other ones too. But even worse than that was when even I would do a job of substituting the opposite, the obsession was, how am I doing now? What's my emotional temperature? Am I really doing it right? Am I getting rid of those character defects? What's my grade today? And total self-obsession locked into my own soul still. So the 12 and 12 was very helpful. And the first part talks about character defects and character building. And again, what all of these defects are, and do we want to separate the men from the boys? Can you grow up here? And then the second chapter on step 7, well actually it's the 7th chapter, on step 7 talks about humility, and that humiliation gets you a long way toward humility. And in looking back on that, I realized that I had taken that 7th step prayer. My Creator, I am now willing that you have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character that stands in the way of my usefulness to you and to my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. May it come true. Yeah, so it says, take all of me, good and bad, because I didn't know what was good and I didn't know what was bad, but I knew that something was wrong. And it talks about humiliation, and I thought about those times. I had a great sense of entitlement because I was so me-centered that all of you should cater to me and make me feel good. I'm the center of the universe, don't you know? And so just a small example of that was always cutting in front of everybody in a line. I want coffee. It's my right as an alcoholic to have coffee. Well, in the Pacific group, in short order, somebody in the line, usually an old-timer, would say, you cut into line. That's humiliation. And at first I tried, oh, you have to be nice to me. I'm fairly new. And the old-timer said, I am being nice to you. You don't know it, but this is important information. You cut into line like that, people won't like you. Public humiliation, hideous. And I just had this sense, I'm a little worse than most people, a little bit crazier, so then, therefore, I have to try to be better than everybody else and get their attention. And I used to make homemade cards when people celebrated AA anniversaries. I would make them, and sometimes I'd make gifts for them. And in those days, we had parties where all of the cards got read, all of the gifts got opened, and the sponsor would sit there with Sponsee and read card after card after card, saying, happy birthday, you are wonderful. And so I would make mine very special. And as an example, I just remembered one of them was, there was a fellow named Hooper that was celebrating a birthday. And so I made a card for him, and I drew a tree, and I drew an owl in it. And the owl was saying, hoo, hoo, hoo. And you open the card, and it says, Hooper, Hoopy birthday. Well, it got the usual, ooh, that's amazing. And I just, again, swelled up. Pride. And are they going to really notice me now? And so that went on for a while. And I went to a 3rd year birthday for a friend, Carol M., who's still sober to this day. And she was having this birthday, but we didn't do cards and gifts on a 3rd birthday, only birthday number 1, 2, and then multiples of 5 after that. When I got sober, no one was sober longer than 15 years around, so it stopped with 15. And so there was just a nice party. She had brought everybody into her house and had served some little snacks and things, and yet I thought, I've got to do something big so they'll really notice me. And she had deep fear of speaking in public, to such an extent that even after 3 years she wouldn't get up and talk in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. She was just terrified. So I made for her a practice podium, great big cardboard box that I folded out, and I cut out of magazines many people and faces and things, and glued them on the back of this big cardboard panorama, so it looked like hundreds of people. And then I made a little artificial microphone for her to talk into in front of this panorama. And I even put in a bullet. So I said, bite the bullet and just get up to the microphone and talk. And I put it in a great big box and took it to the party. And they weren't going to open gifts at that party. What am I going to do? I've spent so much time on this. They've got to know. So finally I cajoled enough people so that they would actually open this one. And there were the oohs and ahs, and I think Carol was mortified, the birthday girl. But anyway, I was thinking, I've got it, but it made me feel a little bit uneasy though. And they were saying, that's really funny, that's a good one. But the group leader and founder, Clancy, came over to me, and he, in front of everybody, said, you like group noise way too much. I mean, if he even looked at me, it just devastated me. But I mean, he was embarrassing me in front of all of these people. And he said, you know, you're going to make yourself out to be different, terminally different, and you'll go out and drink and die. Why don't you try to be like other alcoholics? Just join the ranks for a change. And he was not being kind, except he was being very kind. He probably saved my sobriety that night. And I stopped doing that. And every now and then I'd make a homemade card. But I just began to realize that the gift of fitting in is so much more gratifying than this pursuit of pride and get people to notice me. Love the fact that we're called Alcoholics Anonymous. So what was happening was that these character defects were being removed by God through the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous against my will. I mean, I didn't like public humiliation. There's just, I just have to refer to our 12 and 12 because it's so lovely. There's this one thing that eventually, where humility had formerly stood for a forced feeding on humble pie, it now begins to mean the nourishing ingredient of humility. If we can endure the pain and humiliation, then, and pay attention, what is Alcoholics Anonymous? What is my sponsor saying? What is being said? Then I learn something. I learn something valuable. But it's not the learning in my mind. I can learn from our literature. If that worked, I'd just buy the 12 and 12 and big book and go home and sit on my couch and get wonderful sobriety. No, it is being immersed in the fellowship and living through experience after experience. And these humiliations were having a profound effect. Another thing that was beginning to happen, though, was that Marion, my sponsor, had always say yes to AA requests. And that was another huge component and absolutely necessary for step 7. And as I said yes to AA requests, I was being asked to do things that caused me a lot of fear. Just to go out to other places and give a talk in the beginning was so frightening. I tried to say, I can't do that. Even to talk in my home group was just so scary. The first time that happened, I was just asked to give a 10-minute talk. And I hadn't done that before. But I thought, well, I'm in this fellowship, and I'm going to be rigorously honest. So I got up and I talked about all of my anxieties and depression and how I just couldn't really understand the spiritual part of the program. And then sat down after 10 minutes like that of existential angst and ran to my sponsor. How did I do? How did I do? And she said, well, it was good that you said yes and you got up and talked. But Marilyn, you're going to have to start mentioning that you drank. And, humiliation. But ever after that, I did mention my drinking, which for mystical reasons is absolutely essential. Alcoholics Anonymous gives us our stories by our telling. And then we come to know that we are real alcoholics. We fit the pattern that we hear about here, around here. So I began to do that, but then things got a little bit harder, and I found myself asking my higher power, who I was coming to believe in, please help me, please, just give me the words to say. I've been asked to talk at this strange meeting, and please help me do that. And so it was beginning to transfer that me-centeredness to a cry for help, to something there that I was beginning to trust, beginning to focus on my higher power. Not, I'm doing this, I can do this, I'm brave and strong, but it's, I can't do it. But I believe you might be there. Can you please, just can you help me? And I got help. I was getting help. I was becoming focused on higher power in these moments of stress. And so my sponsor said, you know, you've got these little children, they're in school now, and you should join the PTA. And oh my gosh, I just wanted, like those old Bela Lugosi vampire movies where I wanted to hold up a crucifix and cover myself over with garlic. No, don't make me do that, please, no, not the PTA. Well, again, that was just fear. I was afraid of normal women. I didn't know how to be a normal woman, still don't. But I was afraid of encountering them in those days. And she said, just join the PTA, be a good citizen in your school. So I thought, say yes to my sponsor. I have to do everything she says. Again, that was not anything I would ever have thought of, but I was saying yes to something. And what happened was that I went to the PTA and I stepped in, and in my panic and my nervousness, I reverted to early sobriety, and I stepped in and I said, hi, I'm a scientist. And several people looked at me in a strange way, but the person who seemed to be the leader in a big, beautiful, flowery dress came over and she said, we've been waiting for you. We need a science chairman. So I became the science chairman, and my request was to make a little science kit, a chemistry kit for the elementary grades. Can you do that? And I, of course not. Now, I had studied a long time, but now I was so cowed by early sobriety and trying to take these steps and afraid of my sponsor. I mean, just something like that scared me to death. So I talked to Marion, do I have to do this? And of course she said yes. I mean, you've gone to school, you studied science for a long time, you were a graduate student, you were working on your PhD, of course you can do that. Oh, no, I can't. So again, I had to ask for help. Higher power, if you're there, I don't know how to do this. Well, I had 3 little children, and so I began to put some things together, and science started coming back to me. And I made some little Mickey Mouse experiments. You know, you can mix vinegar and baking soda, and it makes a lot of bubbles. You can drop corn in, and the bubbles attach, and they float up to the top. And so I do these little experiments, and if Becky, David, and Susie, my 3 children, would say, ah, then that's a winner, we'll put that in. And then I'd do some other ones, like chromatography paper, and they'd, what? No, we leave that one out. So they were really good testers. And so I put this kit together, and they liked it. And then I was asked to take it to some other schools in the district or that area and talk to the teachers. And again, absolute terror, because I had not been out in the world. And now I had gotten to the place where I could talk in AA, but not to science teachers. In the elementary grades, I mean, they were just grade school teachers, but they scared me to death. And again, please God, I was just shaking with fear when I had to give that first talk and try to demonstrate this little kid. But I got through it, and I took the lab book that we'd made back and showed it to Marion and gave her a copy, and she thumbed through it and she said, "Marilyn, it's good you did that. Do you realize that this is the first time in your life that you have ever done anything useful with all this education that you received?" And I had to admit, yep, that's true. That's true. But it was the beginning. And again, you know, she reminded me of that second part of that 7th-step prayer. Take all of me, take away these defects that get in the way of my usefulness to you and to my fellows. We are put here, we're kept sober, but we're asked to be useful. I don't think I've ever become maximally useful, which is a line in the big book that I try to ignore. But I do try to be useful now and then. And so, after talking about this, especially with new people who wanted to learn about 6 and 7 after we do an inventory, when I hear a 5th step, and we try to suss out those things that get in the way, that block that entrance into the human race, that hang us up so terribly. And then I begin to try to coax them into 6 and 7 and the joys of that. Well, the thing is, you can't feel the joys of that until you get beyond that. So it's a very hard selling point when you're just happy to have character defects and they get you temporary gratification and make life seemingly easy. You forget about the tab. But if you just let go of all of those, there is something so much better that we will give to you, that the fellowship gives to you, that your higher power will give to you. And you can't know that until you give it a try. And I can't even put it into words, but we have words like comfort, serenity, joy, just glad to be alive kind of thing, freedom to walk into a room and not be afraid of anybody. Those come from these steps that we take. And if they take them, then life is blessed. But then the main dealing for me with 6 and 7 on that level was a long time ago, and I've tried to live that way. But then 6 and 7 turned more or less into 10 and 11, because these character defects that are removed, just like the invisible boat, when I slow down and stop being quite so active in Alcoholics Anonymous, maybe don't pick up the phone when it rings, when I'm doing that, then some of those defects come out of the defects cedar chest where they've been stored away. And I went back to work, went back to school, went back to work in sobriety, and there was a point at which I began to worship lesser gods like money, property, prestige. In doing that, my life came to a lesser life, should we say, kind of gray. And now I could tell an occasional lie, to get ahead at work, maybe a little malicious gossip, that would help me. And then, luckily, I was drawn back into to more activity. And it's mainly through steps 10 and 11. We're like old refrigerators, of course. Now, if you're young, you probably don't remember when you had to defrost a refrigerator, but in the old days, you do, yeah, they're bad. There was an ice chest that was very cold to keep the refrigerator cold, but it would freeze water on it, so you'd get this enormous fur of ice all over the ice thing. And And it wouldn't go away, it just got bigger and bigger. So you'd have to turn off the power and put a pan underneath, and the ice would melt and drip, 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 and finally you'd have this nice, clean refrigerator again that had been de-iced. And then you'd turn the power back on, and it would work for a while, and then the fur would come back, the ice fur. So I had to just look at this like the de-icing process, steps 10 and 11. And if I can de-ice every day, I lead a much, much better life. And the joys of 6 and 7 are just living with a kind of freedom, as I say, that allows me to be with other people and know that I am one among many. No better, no worse. We're just all here, but unique in each one of us. There is not one person here that duplicates another person. I believe that we're all here, God's children, to do something unique for us. And it's our job in recovery. What is my unique task? I don't know. How do I know? I don't get a telegram. But somebody in Alcoholics Anonymous tells me that next step to take, that next move to make. And it might be, go to Naples and talk about 6 and 7. You never know. But I do try to say yes to all of these AA requests. And that stands me in good enough stead that I can walk with comfort around planet Earth. And how is that manifest? What does that even mean? Well, there was one example lately was that I mentioned my long-suffering husband. I fell in love with him deeply. And it was actually a kind of grown-up love. We did things for each other. And I had a lot of joy in that love affair. After about 20 years, took quite a while for me to kind of grow up. And those last years were beautiful indeed. But then he got sick, and we had some tragic things happen, and he manifested grief with physical illness. In the last 5 or 10 years, he was not well. And toward the end, he was paralyzed on hospice care in a hospital bed in our living room for many, many months. And I was the caregiver. And it's a gift from this program, from my higher power, from all of you, that I saw that as a privilege, that I could take care of Bill. I was the one called to do that. I was unique in that role. And I accepted it graciously. I had to confine my AA activities to a geographic small circle. But by that time I was sponsoring a bunch of people, and so I was in constant touch with them and could go to local meetings and get out for a while. But it was one of those unusual times that I was called to serve. And there were those moments though. One I remember when it was near the end, and Bill had come to believe in his own way because he had begun to visit the other side and meet some people who had passed on. Now, I don't know what that was about, but it was very convincing to him and a great comfort to me that he was no longer afraid. And in one of those moments, he said, "Perfect marriage." And I thought, oh my gosh, I've been forgiven. Thank you, this is wonderful. And then he added, no, not quite perfect. I know, I was such a witch. Something that rhymes with it. But then he added, because it only lasted for 60 years. And so I hold that in my heart. And he passed on. One of the things I think that made him decline in health so terribly was that about 12 years ago we lost our son. Bill loved him deeply. And sadly he took his own life one Friday night. So that was a great rupture in the fabric of our family. And I thought that I would not live through that, but my sponsor at that time had become Clancy, and he was very powerful, and he said, you go home. I was out of town at the time. Go home, take care of your husband. He doesn't have a program, and you have 40 years of sobriety now. And you'll be able to do that. Be there for your family. Another one of those things, say yes to your sponsor. And I did that, and that was another long journey of recovering from deep and terrible grief. I can tell you that so many people, including the great Sandy B. from Tampa, was such a friend during that time. He heard about it through the AA grapevine, not the magazine, but we are a network. And he called me and he said, and he had lost his 2 daughters the year before. And he told me how to get through that, and other people too. And it worked. It's the lesson from all was go out to your higher power, form a tighter bond than ever. And when you do begin to go through the necessary grief, guess who comes back with you? And Sandy said that. And other friends who had suffered the same kind of things said, accept, and there will be many, many blessings. Many blessings. And again, one of those hard lessons in Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything in me wanted to die. I wanted to die myself. But self-destruction is a very bad character defect, very unforgivable. And so again, life had presented something, and Alcoholics Anonymous told me what to do. And through that did come a kind of resilience, so that when I lost Bill, when my sponsor of 30 years, Clancy, passed away, I could harbor that and was much stronger than I otherwise would have been, and was able to comfort other people who had not gone through that kind of thing. So many blessings. Just buying this program on good faith. And one of the later ones is that I've got these grandchildren now, because I had 2 daughters who have given birth many times. And one of the grandsons, darling, sweet Adam, he just turned 24. Well, a year ago, he called me and said, Grandma, I got a job in downtown Los Angeles. Can I move in with you? And I said, yes, I have some extra bedrooms, and please come. And he moved in. He's been there for a year, and he is the delight of my life. And he's not ashamed to go out with Grandma. He even takes me to movies, and he said, I have a paycheck now, so I can take you to the movies. And we've gone to see some good ones, and I take him out to dinner, and he loves that. He graduated from college as a scientist and made a calculation that if you go to a different restaurant in Los Angeles every night, it will take 47 years to go to all of them. So I'll say, Adam, let's go out to dinner. We've got a lot of restaurants to try out. But it's just one of those coincidences, who knows. I always thought that David, our son, would be with us in these later years. And that was not to be. But there's Adam. He's not David, but he's Adam, the joy of my life. AA, through these steps, through this fellowship, through my friends, gives me everything I need and ever so much more. Thank you.